lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing a mid-month reading wrap-up. I don't normally do these, but April has been a fairly prolific reading month for me given the lockdown, so I have actually hit 13 or 14 books already, so I wanted to talk to you about these to stop my end of month wrap-up becoming about an hour long. So because it is the Owls Readathon, I'm actually going to go in order of the Owls prompts that I've managed to fulfill, and then I have a handful of books to talk about afterwards that don't naturally fit in with the readathon anywhere that I have also read this month. The first prompt I've completed for this month is Ancient Runes, and that's read a book with a heart on the cover or title, and for that one I read The Lonely Hearts Hotel by Heather O'Neill. This is a historical fiction with a little bit, not quite magical realism, but very much some sort of kind of mystical fantastical element to it. It's set in Canada and New York in the 1920s, and it follows two orphans who have a connection in the orphanage where they both grow up, and then it's about their life splintering off and coming back together. It was a really beautiful book that I ended up reading in one day. It was the kind of book that really sort of grabs you by the throat and won't let go. Stylistically it really reminds me of things like Station 11 and The Bear and the Nightingale in terms of that real immersive experience as a reading. It was quite graphic in places. It's got a lot of sex in it, and quite not grotesque sex, but kind of not very airbrushed or sugar-coated. There's sort of discussions of paedophilia, there's discussions of rape, there's discussions of prostitution. It goes quite dark in places, and it's worth bearing that in mind going in, but it's also really surprisingly beautiful. Our two main characters are performers, and it goes into detail about their dance and music performance, and then it includes elements of the circus in it, and it was just absolutely beautiful. It also reminded me a bit of the Night Circus because of that, so it was a really lovely reading experience, but also tinged with a hint of like the grotesque in there, so it was a very, very interesting time indeed. Then I read NP by Banana Yoshimoto. This was for the prompt of Charms, which was read a book with a white cover. This one is translated fiction. It's translated from Japanese, and to be honest it didn't particularly resonate with me. I could see what Banana Yoshimoto was trying to do, and it sort of echoes a lot of similar themes I find in a lot of Japanese literature. So NP is about a particular collection of stories which various people have tried to translate over the years, but whenever they do they end up committing suicide quite shortly afterwards, and it is about a woman who is kind of exploring this because her partner commits suicide after trying to translate some of these stories, and she ends up meeting the children of the author of these infamous stories, and it's about her kind of interactions with them. The children are fully grown as adults. It didn't really resonate for me. Most Japanese literature that I've read seems to be really trying to do sort of like quiet beauty in our world, and for this one it just didn't really land. I didn't really like any of the characters, I didn't like their interactions, and there was the discussion of both suicide and also incest in here, and again like incest not only between brother and sister but also between daughter and father was really like glossed over in a way that I didn't feel very comfortable with at all, and I just don't think there was enough like interesting stuff in the book to gloss over those things properly, and it just really didn't land. I can see, like, I'm not going to rule out Banana Yoshimoto completely for the future because I can see the beginnings of what could work for me in there if it was a different subject matter, but I just feel like this was trying to do something like what Before the Coffee Gets Cold was attempting to do, and not really doing it very well because it's kind of clashing with a lot of different things, and I just didn't really enjoy it. Then I have for divination, it was a random number generator, and I listened to an audiobook, The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells. I really enjoyed this book. This details the story of two men and their trip up to the moon, but they go in like a giant orb made out of this metal and like freaky material that basically can defy the Earth's gravitational pull. One of them is a scientist and one of them's a bit more of a businessman, and it's when they go up to the moon they find a weird, bizarre, almost frog ant-like type species living on the moon, and it's about their interactions. It was so fun. Like, I love H.G. Wells. He's a classic sci-fi writer, and this was being written at the turn of the century, way before we ever actually got to the moon, so it's fun to see what clearly were scientific advancements at the time being applied, and this theory that the moon would have an ocean, but the ocean would be inside it, and kind of some of the logic to talking through why that would scientifically be the case, even though we clearly know now that that's not the case, and also how the different theories that H.G. Wells was putting forward about how one might get to the moon, obviously with the hindsight of how we actually did it. I love H.G. Wells. I love his biology as well. I think he's so good at creating different and new species and discussing like bodily functions and kind of societies and things. I thought that was the strongest part of War of the Worlds. That's why I love The Island of Dr. Moreau. So from that perspective, he was really onto a solid winner there. It also had a really fun, quirky twist ending, which I won't go into, but I was pleasantly surprised by it. It kind of starts to wrap itself up about 2/3 through, and I was like, wait, what? Like, is this really how it's going to end? And then it does something very, very cool right at the very end, and I really appreciated that. So 5 stars. Love this book. H.G. Wells, fan favourite, clearly. The next book I read was for Herbology, and that is a book which has the title beginning with M, and for that one I read Mama's Last Hug by Frans de Waal. Mama's Last Hug is looking at animal emotion and the various different ways that we can understand animal emotion, the different experiments that have been done to find out exactly to what degree animals do feel emotion. Frans de Waal is a primatologist, so the bulk of the book does focus on apes and chimpanzees because that's where the bulk of his work has been done, but he does discuss other things as well, other animals as well, and looks at all sorts of other different research. And it's looking at things like, can animals grieve? Do animals genuinely feel joy? How do we define consciousness and sentience, and do animals have us? It was really interesting to read, and it was just, again, like a beautiful, beautiful book. The description of the animals and the different experiments was just so lovely and heartwarming and really just like soothing to read. The different ways that the chimpanzees interact was absolutely just glorious, and it really reminds you that human beings have a tendency to elevate our status on the planet far beyond what we really should, and this idea that we are the only special creatures who could possibly feel all of these things, and just how far we've come in such a short period of time as like a scientific community for understanding these things. You know, it was only till very recently that we believed that animals didn't feel pain, but we also believed that babies didn't feel pain for an alarmingly long period of time, and it kind of details some of those changes. And as somebody who is a pet owner and has been around animals most of her life, and if you are a pet owner as well, there'll be sections of it that you definitely recognise and be like, yes, clearly the animals around me have emotions and kind of express them. So it was absolutely beautiful, glorious, really heartwarming. The next book I read was for History of Magic, and this is a book featuring witches, and I read The Shades of Milk and Honey by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is a Regency romance with a bit of magic thrown in, and was just so much fun and so heartwarming. So think pretty much like Jane Austen, but with all of the characters having the ability to make glamours, and by this we mean kind of illusions, almost treated like a form of kind of art, like music or painting, but kind of blended together as things that they can make physically in the world. And our main character is a bit dumpy looking, you know, she's not the belle of the ball, but she has a real talent with illusions and glamours, and it's about her and her sister, who is very much the pretty, elegant, classic lady of society, but has almost no abilities with glamours, and it's about really their like jealousies with each other, and then a collection of kind of conflicting potential budding romances in there. I think Mary Robinette Kowal does an amazing job of keeping the like historical details and the real like Regency touches, so it does feel like it is more of an Austen, rather than sometimes when you read historical fiction set from written from a modern day, the characters will do and say things that really aren't in keeping with what would have been appropriate at the time. So I really enjoyed this. This is part of a series, but it turns out that rather than doing the classic romance thing of sparking off with some secondary characters, it's going to continue with our 2 main characters and their relationship, and honestly I'm not interested in that. So despite how much I enjoyed it, I probably won't be continuing with it, because for me it's all about that like beginning budding romance, and it looks like the later books based on their blurbs go into more of a kind of thriller aspect, which is really not what I'm looking for from this series. But it has reinforced that I really like Mary Robinette Kowal's writing, so I'll definitely check out more from her, even if it's not specifically in this series. The next book I read was Queen Victoria by Lucy Worsley. This is for Muggle Studies and it's from the perspective of a Muggle. This one I actually buddy read with Jenny from Bookish Shenanigans. I'll link her channel down below. This is a biography of Queen Victoria, as the title suggests. And what was really fun about this one compared to a lot of standard biographies is the way that Lucy Worsley approached it was she was actually taking specific days in the Queen's life and looking at what happened on that day in particular, but also other things around it. So rather than it being like a broad sweeping look at her life, we had these sort of pinpoint moments to drop in and out of, which were really helpful. I think there was about 40 in total. Let me check that. Sorry, 24 different days. It was really interesting to find out more about Queen Victoria. I knew very little about her beyond the classic I'm not amused relationship with Prince Albert, extensive mourning, that was pretty much it. So it was really interesting to learn about her from her youth and then going all the way through. It looks at her relationship with Prince Albert and the amount that she'd been undermined as a woman and as a queen rather than as a king, and the various like men in her life and how she'd had to deal with both scandal but also being continually kind of a bit like gaslighted and like I say, undermined by them to believe that she wasn't capable of doing a lot of the things that she could do. So that was very interesting. A lot of the kind of urban standard like common knowledge I have of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert is very like rose tinted, so it was really lovely to read something that was kind of looking a little bit more at the nitty-gritty. She obviously had a hugely influential reign, did so many different things, and it was really interesting to see those in here. This one didn't go into a crazy amount of detail about what was happening in the Victorian time within her reign. It was more looking at naturally her because it's a biography of her, so I feel like there were a few points where I kind of missed out on information because I didn't have enough general background knowledge on the Victorian era to like place it for myself historically. But Lucy Worsley's writing style is so light and so comforting and so easy to read, so I'm definitely going to pick up more from her. She's a hugely prolific writer as well, so there's like tons out there that I definitely want to read, and this was just really heartwarming to see the like real human side to somebody. It's often the case when we have these really big names in history, especially in the royalty, that you kind of forget that they are actually like people in their own right, and they have preferences when it comes to like their clothes and their food and just the little humane touches. It was really lovely to read all of those. The next book I read is for Potions, and that is a book under 150 pages, and for that I read The Blue Fox by Sjorn. This is another translated fiction. This time it's actually Nordic fiction, and it is about a gentleman out in the Antarctic chasing down a blue fox. And honestly, it was really weird and I didn't enjoy it. I don't fully get what happened in this book. There was something to do with some kind of like relationship with a woman with Down syndrome, but we barely got to see her or touch on her. So the fact that she had Down syndrome felt very forced, which was a bit strange. There was this guy following a blue fox over the ice, and I think he dies out there, but I'm not too sure. It was kind of touching on some weird magical realism thing. At one point I think the fox spoke to him. I don't really know what happened. It was quite short. It was very bizarre. Even weirder, like even not only is it short, but like the bulk of the pages is actually blank. It's kind of in these tiny little snapshotty things, and I just think it's doing something quirky and interesting that I don't have the mental headspace for now. So this one really didn't resonate with me. I'm not having great luck with translated fiction at the moment. So if you like really quirky, weird literary things, this might be right up your alley, but as somebody who just wants to sink her teeth into a really good plot, this one didn't work for me at all. And then the final book specifically for the prompts of the Owls Readathon, I have Transfiguration, which is a book about shapeshifting, and for that I read The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. I actually read this to my parents over like Zoom over the course of about 2.5 weeks, which was really lovely. I read them a chapter every day because my dad wanted to borrow this book, but I didn't have a chance to get it to him before the lockdown became enforced, so instead I decided to read it to him and my mum joined in. John Wyndham is a classic sci-fi writer from the 50s, and this is again just another absolutely just stunning example of classic sci-fi. This is a post-apocalyptic world where any person who has any kind of deviation based on like nuclear fallout, we are led to believe that it's all a bit like unclear because of the lore and the fact that like so much information from the time before this crazy event happened has been lost. But if you do have some kind of mutation of some sort, or deviation as they're called in this book, you are outlawed to the fringes. Our main character has said deviation. He has the ability to have a bit of a hive mind with several other people who also have this deviation, and it's about them trying to keep it hidden from their community, and then when it does get discovered, inevitably it's about them going on the run and their attempt to try and flee from their civilization and what they can find afterwards. What was really fun about this is the way that John Wyndham eked out the world building in such a kind of gentle, easygoing manner that you sort of slowly these things drop into place, and it was just wonderful to see the kind of twists on like real classic ideas that he was playing with. Also, this book deals a lot with ideas of like religion, because the Bible is one of the few books in this world that have survived after whatever happened, so it plays a lot with the idea of God's vengeance. They believe that whatever has struck the world was God's, like, the tribulation from God's wrath, and this idea that if they sin again then they will get it will happen again, and deviations are the work of the devil. So it's really playing around with the idea of kind of religious zealotry and sort of mob mentality from that, and it was so much fun and had some really interesting quirky stuff going on. I love Wyndham. I think he does really fun twists on sort of real classics, and you know, he was writing in the 50s, so that's even more interesting when you think about like they're still relevant today, and it's still definitely how it play out today. So it's like grasp on like humans and how we interact like individually and as groups is really, really strong. So yeah, firm favourite here. Oh, I forgot one. I did actually read one for astronomy, which is read the majority of this whilst it's dark outside. I read the Animorphs number 17, which I believe was called The Underground or The Escape or something. This is by K.A. Applegate. It's the middle grade series that I'm reading at the moment, and there's like 60 in the series, so I'm going to be going for a while now. It's about 5 shape-shifting kids who can morph into animals, and their battle against the evil bad guys, the Yerks, which are aliens determined to take over the human race by infiltrating our brains. They're like shaped like tiny slugs, and they go in our ears and then take over our brains. I'm not going to detail too much what happens in book 17 because obviously I'm far too deep in the series now, but very classic standard Animorphs. I have read some other books this month that don't fit in with any of these particular categories, and I'm going to talk about them now. I've been going through a phase of reading a fair amount of contemporary romance, which is not normally my jam, but there's something so light-hearted about it that it's really appealing at the moment. So I've actually read 3 this month. All of them I read like in one sitting at night, staying up until absurdly late because I couldn't get to sleep. So I'm expecting a couple more to happen before the end of this month, and indeed the end of this lockdown happens, because they are really just such lovely light palette cleansing type books that I'm really enjoying them. The first one that I read was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is hugely popular on BookTube. I think all the ones that I'm going to talk about again are like BookTube darlings, so I'm sorry if you've heard a lot about these before, but this is one where it's an enemies to lovers trope where the sister of the bride and brother of the groom of this particular wedding, where everybody gets food poisoning apart from them, go on their honeymoon because they can't get it refunded, so somebody might as well go, and then they get caught in a classic fake dating trope and hilarity ensues. It does genuinely, I think with all of these, but this one especially, it reads like fan fiction, which that is not a criticism in the slightest of this book. It is exactly what I was looking for. It hit all the kind of standard beats. I didn't really believe the enemies to lovers thing too much. It just seemed like the main female character was unnecessarily snarky, but it did have some real classic like pretending to date, being, you know, in a situation where they end up needing to kiss and then enjoying it, all sorts of silly hilarity. At one point there's a thing with a towel. It's all very funny. There's only one bed, all of that kind of classic stuff. I don't think Christina Lauren's doing anything particularly revolutionary or interesting with this one, but I definitely enjoyed it. The next one I then read was The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary, and this one is where 2 people, it's they live together, they share a bed, but they've never met. Because basically he works nights, she works days, and they're doing a flat share based on that time split. This one I enjoyed a lot more. The kind of the way that their relationship grew, I really appreciated. I thought it was doing some slightly deeper, more interesting stuff. The main male character's brother is in jail, being wrongly accused. The main female character has dealt with some serious emotional abuse from her previous boyfriend, and only really starting to discover that and try and come to terms with the emotional abuse that she ended up going through. So it's one that gets a little bit more intense in places, which I did definitely appreciate, because I felt like it gave a little bit more depth and really grounded the characters in a little bit more reality. I thought the kind of backing cast of characters was again a little bit more believable in this one. They had more that I could kind of really like link with, and I believed them as characters a lot more. So I really enjoyed this one. I think this one was my favourite in terms of like how developed everything felt, and was the one that felt least fanficky because it felt the most like complete in its own story, if that makes sense. And this is not meant to criticise romance or fanfiction in any way. I read so much fanfiction, like, I'm sorry. And then the other one that I read was Well Met by Jen Deluca, and this again is kind of an enemies to lovers, but enemies is too strong a word, like irritation to lovers idea. And this is where a woman is looking after her sister's kid because her sister was in a car accident, and the daughter wants to volunteer in a Renaissance fair all summer, but she needs an adult chaperone. So this woman decides to join in, and then in doing so she has a bit of a clash with the guy who runs the Renaissance fair, but it's how they get past this over the course of the summer. I enjoyed this one because the Renaissance fair setting made it so much fun, and there were so many really cute little details, and it also reminded me, I got like weirdly nostalgic from my touring days, and also from when I used to do walkabouts as like I used to be a circus performer, and it really reminded me, the descriptions of like trying to stay in character and wandering around and interacting with people and the prep you do beforehand reminded me a lot of the stilt walking gigs I've done in the past, which is a weird way to resonate with a romance book, but it really it made me smile in that way. I enjoyed it. I think it was probably the middling one. I think the Unhoneymooners Unhoneymooners was my least favourite, and then this one's kind of here, and then Flatshare was just above it. It was enjoyable, and it had some interesting discussions about grief in it, which I thought were good. One thing I've noticed all of them do is there's a really cringy, awkward proposal at the end of every single one of the books. I'm assuming this is just a standard trope in like contemporary romance, and so I'm not hugely down with that. I think it's very trite, but fine, I'll just accept it if it is a standard trope. I am looking to read some more contemporary romance and have a few more on my shelves. I've added some to my Goodreads want to read list, but if you have any recommendations that are veering more towards the Flatshare rather than Unhoneymooners, do let me know in the comments down below. I don't know how many of my subscribers read this kind of stuff, because obviously it's hardly been a staple on this channel up to this point, but I'm enjoying it and it's my channel, so The last book that I read so far this month is The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett M. Graff. This is an oral history of 9/11, and I can't actually talk to you about it because I am reading this for the round 2 of the BookTube Prize. I'll link the BookTube Prize channel down below. If you've been here for a while, you'll know about it already. I'm one of the judges for non-fiction, and we're now into round 2. I am in group D, and I haven't actually talked yet on this channel about the books I'm reading for that, because I released my April TBR before finding out what group I was in and what books there were. So I'm just going to run through them now very quickly with you once I find them in my list. So like I said, The Only Plane in the Sky I've already read. I also have Sea People. I'm going to put or like the covers here because I can't remember the author. This one's about a history of Polynesia, the Polynesian people. I've got She Said, which is right here. I have actually started this one already. Again, clearly I can't talk about it, but it is one of my currently reading books, which I'm going to talk about a few of them in a second. Then Trick Mirror, which again is an essay collection. I am partway through that one as well. And then there's also A Woman of No Importance, which is about a spy in World War II. That will be the next audiobook I go on to most likely. And then The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, which I do have here. Get this out. Towers. This guy, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Treuer, and this is Native America from 1890 to the present. So those are going to be appearing either by the end of April or sometime in May, but I won't be able to talk about my thoughts until the end of this round, which does finish at the end of May, so you'll hear about them very, very early June. Okay, let's go on to what I'm currently reading, shall we? So like I said, I've got Trick Mirror and She Said on the go. I also started yesterday Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Totally enjoying this so far. It's a classic. You should know what Treasure Island is. I bought the Muppets Treasure Island on DVD, and I'm planning on, when I finish this, sitting down and watching that, which I think is going to be so much fun. Treasure Island, so I'm 50 pages in of like a just over 200 page book, and we haven't even got on the boat yet, so it's a little bit of a slow burn, but that's okay. And I know from like watching movie adaptations that the relationship between John Silver and Jim Hawkins is something that they really build up, which makes his betrayal so much more intense at the end. So I'm actually really looking forward to that part of it rather than necessarily even the treasure part of it. I've barely touched the surface, but I have started the Nakano Thrift Shop by Hiromi Kawakami. This is translated fiction. It's Japanese, and I'm hoping I'm going to enjoy this a bit more than the other 2 translated fictions I've just done recently. It's so early days, I can't give you any real thoughts about it. I'm literally only like 20 pages in. I also have on the go, I started this morning, The Museum of Modern Love by Heather someone. It'll be here. Heather Rose, I believe. This is a book about modern day romance, art, love and grief, I think is probably the best way to summarise it. It's based on actually a true piece of performance art, which is this woman sat at a table and allowed members of the general public to come and sit opposite her, and they couldn't say anything. They just kind of kept eye contact for as long as that person wanted, and then they could walk away. And it's about her work and then the people's connections with that. Like I said, I'm listening to it on audiobook. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's absolutely beautiful, and to the point where I'm almost inclined to like, I've got a physical copy of it as well. I'm almost inclined to just kind of sit and blitz it tonight, so I'll probably get that finished by the end of the day in either form, because I'm really enjoying it that much. I'm having read to me The African Queen by C.S. Forrester. This is the one where, because I finished the book reading to the Chrysalids, Dad's now reading one to me and Mum, and this is one that he's picked. It was written in 1935, but it's historical fiction set in the First World War in the heart of Africa, in specifically the African jungle, and it is looking at the relationship between a trader and an English spinster missionary, and their attempt to, I think it's to try and help in some way with some combat going on in there. I don't know a crazy amount, and I'm hoping that it has aged well. Obviously things written around that time that are set in Africa are always a little bit awkward in places from time to time, so that's that one. And I think that's everything I've got on the go at the moment. It's a little hard to track. I'm doing a lot of reading. I don't know whether you picked up on that. So yes, those are all the books I've read so far this month. What do you think? Let me know. Have any of these made it onto your TBR? If you do have any contemporary romance recommendations, give us a shout, or indeed historical romance recommendations. I've not read many of them yet, apart from the Shades of Milk and Honey one, but I am always open to reading a few more. So yes, that will be it from me. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!